Hello everybody, I'm your host Zenitsu, and you're listening to the Digi Talks podcast, the show that covers various topics from news to meta developments and everything in between for the fine folks who love the Digimon trading card game. Just as a quick reminder, I do stream this live over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, and it's also uploaded as a YouTube video under the channel of Zenitsu, on top of being on various podcasting platforms like Spotify for your viewing and listening pleasure. Please feel free to leave a rating, like, follow, subscribe, review, whatever, depending on the platform that you're listening on. It really does help support the podcast. So, just as a little bit of a preface, yes, I am messing around with my intros. YouTube really has a strict rule on music, so if my intro is going to be changing between the next couple of episodes, that's going to just be through experimentation. Tell me your thoughts about the intros down in the comments below. If you have any suggestions to like a good royal-free intro. I'm not a musician and I don't really have good capabilities with music editing software, so I just kind of use whatever I can find. So I do apologize for that in advance. But getting back a little bit on track, today I am with Jay Stewart, and we are actually going to be doing the Q&A episode. So I asked a bit ago about like questions that you had for me and my co-host at the time on just general thoughts about the game, and today we're actually going to answer those. So if you want to post any questions that you have and get those answered in future episodes, by all means, again, go to the comments and post your questions, and we'll try to answer them the best that we can. If it's going to be another Q&A episode, I'm probably going to be doing like another community post on YouTube and ask around for that. But today, before we actually start with the meat and potatoes of the meta report, we have the question of the week. And today's question is going to be a little bit on the interesting side because it does require a little bit of explanation. And the question of the week is the fact that, is having a diverse format what we actually want if the price of that diversity is toxicity? And what I mean by toxicity is basically no deck, like in the upper echelons of the game, in the greater scheme of the meta, is actually that fun to fight against. The game, in my perspective, is not necessarily in the greatest estates. Anyone who's listened to me for a while kind of has heard me say that ad nauseum, and I see this argument a lot of the times on, oh, but the format is diverse. But I'm sitting here thinking, is that diversity actually good? If everything that I'm going to be playing against is just not fun. So, again, feel free to answer the question, viewer, chat, audience, down in the comments below. I'm curious to hear what your standpoint on that type of a topic is, Jay Stewart.
Yeah, so for me, I think it is a little bit of a case-by-case kind of scenario. I mean, because we have seen some formats where it is toxic and it's not diverse, and we also have seen formats where it is diverse and it wasn't toxic at all. Like, you could take BT14/BT15 as an example of being a widespread, diverse format. I mean, yes, was there still some decks that we have seen during those time periods like Mirage that were power and everything? Yes, but there was other decks that seem. I'm trying to think how I want to say this. It's not like they were overpowered in order to stop Mirage. They were able to keep up, and they had their own counters against, kind of like the rock, paper, scissors situation, so to say.
Yeah, in the past, there definitely was a more fine line of checks and balances to actually create a diverse format rather than these decks are just de facto the apex of the strategy or just some of the strongest decks in the entire game, therefore they're the only things that are playable. Going back to like the BT15 example, like yes, Numemon was the best deck, but it wasn't the best deck by a large margin, and there were plenty of checks and counters to it, and those checks and counters also had their cascading checks and counters, which is what created that diverse format to begin with. And what we're seeing right now is, okay, there are a couple of like insanely strong decks. There's some checks and counters to those decks, but those decks don't really have as deep of a check and counter like pool, and half the time that pool ends up looping back in on itself, creating that rock paper scissors, thus limiting the format. So it's just like, just as an example, in BT15 you had Numemon, which got beat by blue decks, but blue decks got beat by black decks, but black decks got beat by like red or green decks, and it was just like a cascading web of checks and balances. And I think like right now, what's making this format in terms of the few diverse decks that we do have so toxic is the fact that there isn't as many answers, if any answers at all, to that upper echelon, thus creating a wider and deeper power gap that we haven't really seen in the game before. I mean, we kind of have, because this has been a growing issue since literally BT16, because Magnamon X and Tyrant created a really toxic environment in terms of these are like the apex gatekeeper decks, and if you can't beat these decks, then you're not really real decks. And Magnamon took that role a little bit more than Tyrant, but people still play Tyrant, so it still kind of is fulfilling that same role, just not as good as Magnamon, which is why Magnamon appears more than Tyrant does in terms of like top results.
Yeah, because like, I mean, if you consider like a lot of the older decks, I mean, and everything, like, I don't know if it's really like the toxicity of seeing them that often. I think it's just how consistent some of those decks have now started becoming, or how fast they've becoming, or even how they've been able to just say, oh, you have protection or blocker, I can ignore that and just do something else, vice versa, or I just make myself an unstoppable wall. Because I know, like, back during BT9, that, Alphamon was argued to be one of the hardest decks to play against, because if it just built up its Congo, Breath of the Gods, so on and so forth, it just became this unstoppable force that had no answers to. There was answers, but it wasn't commonly seen, unfortunately. And it caused people to think that, well, it was that Alphamon was considered one of, if not the best decks of BT9 at the time before the ban and restriction list. But like nowadays, you see like these decks, it's like they all kind of have that same power level of protection that, if not even better than what Alphamon was offering at the time.
Yeah, and similarly to that kind of sentiment, they also had the same level of damage output, and that's kind of like where, like, just there's a lot of compounding elements that led to the game getting to this current state, which a lot of players, I don't know if you've noticed on social media, but a lot of players subtly are not enjoying the current state of the game. They don't want to openly admit it. I don't know why. It seems like really hard to openly admit, because like you do get the backlash of people who enjoy the game and see the game for the good in it, and saying like, no, what you're stating and the problems that you're stating should just be ignored because I think the game is great. And kudos to the people who think that, but like, taking off the rose tinted glasses, you could definitely see different colors and a different picture overall. And like some people in like the Facebook comments, the YouTube comments, other YouTubers in general, they are slowly expressing their discontent for the current state of the game. And I don't know when that is going to start becoming more of a bubbling point. Maybe this is the format that'll start doing that, where it's just like, okay, maybe the game actually isn't in that great of a spot. But that's why I'm literally holding out for like the next ban and restriction list, because I told myself many a times, I give myself a year post unification for Digimon to really prove itself. Otherwise, I'm quitting the game. And if literally they can prove by unification that they can't do that, I'm honestly not even going to give them the full year that I originally was planning, because this is some of the most miserable Digimon I have ever played in the 4 years that I've played the game. I played the game literally since its infancy at its worst, and I've even played its predecessor. And like it's just really interesting to hear different perspectives when it comes to this type of topic, because during the last event I did like a mini interview with Tesuro, and he thinks the format, yes, there are problems with it, but he does believe in what the game is capable of, and he does believe in Bandai to be able to ring it home and kind of reel back and reel in some of the more powerful decks in the current moment. And if anyone's like curious on wondering like where and why some of that is, go back to some of the previous episodes, go back to some of my previous streams, and some of my older content. Like, you could kind of see where the discontent is and why the game kind of slowly got into the state. I could do another like whole episode just dedicated to this type of a topic, but I just wanted to like touch base and kind of get your perspective because of like some of the new information that I'm kind of coming across when it comes to like a pulse on the community and where others are at.
No, and I think you are right about like we are just that one ban list away, because you can kind of even see how Digimon has been like with this newest thing, Digimon Liberators. Like a lot of those decks cannot compete with what the actual meta is, so to say. And you can kind of even see how yeah, there might be one or two cards that slip, but I'll take 2.0 for example. None of those cards seem as powerful as what Magna X was when it was introduced. And these are later sets. Until we see card games creep up in the power level. So you could kind of see that Bandai is maybe taking the hint like, okay, maybe we do need to dial it back. But because there's a lot of these older cards that are still being abused, like the Cerberus package, for example, or even Mirage cards, so to say, that is still causing those decks to stay relevant, and that these newer decks can't compete unless they actually do the same game-breaking things they're able to do. They're not going to be able to compete. So Bandai at some point is going to have to go, okay, in order to cause our sets, future sets, to be getting bought out and everything, we will have to do a ban list at some point.
Yeah, and right now we are like almost 9 months in since BT 16, and that's basically 9 months of this ever growing frustration of a format that we find ourselves in, and it's going to eventually reach a bubbling point if Bandai literally does nothing, because like the game is dramatically different from when it once was, but it doesn't necessarily have to be as bad as it currently is. You could have strong cards, but if you have harder ways to get to said stronger cards, or normal ways to get to stronger cards, then they become more fair. That's literally the balancing act. And right now, Bandai has had such poor balancing in the past year, it's laughably bad. And the compound, like some of the other compounding issues, aren't making this any better because of the fact that like Bandai is printing these option staple cards that are basically ruining and homogenizing deck design. Because like, not to get into another whole side tangent, but like if you actually stop and think about like how decks are built, your average stack based deck, which is going to be the most common form of deck you come across, because you know the whole point of the base premise of the game is going from your level 3 to a level 6. Well, the BT14 training cards are probably one of the biggest defenders in terms of like you have to run these cards, otherwise you will be functionally slower than everything else, because they're the most efficient card for their cost, for a really good search, on top of the fact that it's banked that can be dodged by most of the common floodgates, because memory gain is more egregious than cost reduction, at least at this current moment. So and memory gain blocking floodgates are also more common than cost reduction or like digivolution reduction floodgates. So like it's just fitting this specific role where you're kind of just forced to run 4 of it. Okay, great. You ran 4 of that card out of your 50 card deck. Well, throw in 2 memory boosts because you still need the consistency. So now you're at 6 cards out of your 50 card deck. All right, cool. Now throw in 2 scramble cards. Now you're at 8 cards out of your 50 card deck. Okay, that's almost a fifth of your deck pre-built for you before you even decided what archetype you're even going to be running or what other deck you're going to be running. Granted, yes, there are decks that you could play that can avoid this, but just the fact that their existence warps deck design and the entire game design on top of like play patterns around them is hugely problematic when these cards were supposed to be answers to fix the problems with the game. Because like the whole point on the boosts and the training cards was, throwing down a rookie, searching for the card that I need isn't efficient enough. It's not good enough. I'm giving the opponent something to interact with, and that apparently is a problem. So let's take that interactivity and throw it out the window. Let's now start replacing rookies, especially searching rookies, with these option cards. And now because we're running these option cards, we get less removal cards, and because there's less removal cards, OTK decks start performing better, and because it's just a whole bunch of cascading issues all built around the fact that Bandai just wanted to try to solve a problem with their game, and they're having unintended consequences because they didn't actually think how players would be utilizing these cards. I know that was a long tangent on like added toxicity, but like that kind of thing goes to show you like where some of this stuff is starting to stem from and why it's persisting in the manner it is.
Well, also it might be a little bit of a tangent, but we do need to talk about these kind of things because if you don't talk about it, you're never going to be able to solve the problem too.
Right, because understanding where the problem comes from means that you could actually get to the root of the problem. And I'm not saying those specific style of cards are the root of the problem, because some of them are more fair than others. Because the memory boost, what's making it more fair compared to the training cards is its cost and its refund. Like, it's not a 100% refund. It's like a 70% refund. So, like, you're not getting all of the value back. Yes, you're still banking the card. Yes, it's still uninteractive, but like looking back at some of the old stuff, we were always only running it at 2 of. We were never running it as a 4 of because it just 3 cost sometimes is a little on the high side, which is weird to say. But it is kind of true. And like the scramble cards, I actually like the scramble cards. Sure, they have some broken potential, but that's because broken cards will other broken cards in the deck are going to abuse them, which again goes to the consequences that Bandai might not have thought of when it comes to how they worded some of their cards and when cards are triggering their effects. But the whole idea of the scramble cards is a comeback mechanic. Okay, I build up my 1 stack, it gets blown out, and I lose everything, so therefore I lose the game. Well, scramble cards, as long as you had 1 out on the field, allows you to not necessarily accelerate your evolution. It does a little bit, but not as much as the training or memory boosts do. But it allows you to basically get a rookie back or a card back that you would need in order to be able to, have a chance at coming back in the game. It's a comeback mechanic. So that's like actually something really good. It's just, again, when you combine it with other strategies and that are able to abuse specific combination of windows and abilities, like then it could be a little inherently toxic. But I think the idea is good. And that's good for the game overall, but it did come at a cost with a lot of the other compounding issues. That's why going into the meta reports, we do have one event from BT or Special Booster 2.0 that we actually can talk about. Unfortunately for us, the vast majority of the decks we've already seen before. Shocker, it's not like we didn't call this or didn't exactly foresee this going into this meta, because everything that we currently had was already just that powerful that literally nothing needed to change, and not a whole lot of the new stuff was actually going to be competitively viable. So, in terms of this event, it was the Core TCG November Online Regionals. I did participate in this event. I ended up going 4 wins, 3 losses, 2 ties, um, and that was my record, and I was on Ancient Garurumon. So I was using a little bit of the new hybrid stuff, not a whole lot because Ancient doesn't really need to use a whole lot of it. But yeah, that was my record. Um, and I could say a lot of my opponents were pretty cool. I always like online events because my opponents usually are pretty chill, but I can say the games definitely I did make a couple of mistakes and misplays, but for the most part, the meta was just not fun, and I wasn't having fun. And you could definitely see that in my VOD, which you could watch over on YouTube if you really wanted to. But as far as the event size, it was 379 players, 9 rounds of Swiss, and the top 16 archetype breakdown is as follows. It is 3 Mirages, 3 Lord Nightmon X's, 3 Imperials. I know, the majority of them you have already heard of before. 2 Fens, 1 Shine, 1 Magnamon X, technically 2 purple hybrids. One of them was a more pure purple hybrid build, and the other was a Beelstar purple hybrid build, and then 1 Phoenix Spawn X. So, yeah, the majority outside of literally Lord Nightmon and the purple hybrids, we've all seen before. We all have known what these decks are doing, and literally nothing has changed. So, outside of maybe a couple of new tech cards. But in terms of what actually won the event, there was no undefeated winner because Bandai stopped doing like, hey, we're gonna cut once there's one undefeated. So everyone in the first 6 places went X and 1, and the winner was Mirage Galaxy version. So it's more of the classic Galaxy, not really like Galaxy Loop lock the opponent out of the game. It's Galaxy Loop let's abuse this engine to get into our level 6s as fast as possible. Second place also was the Mirage Galaxy Loop. So if you just want a quick example, here it is. The only like really new spice tech that they added was Regiasmon as just another good generic level 6 in blue. So makes sense. And then the other tech is potentially Shaman or Shamanmon because memory blocking floodgates are good because there's so much memory gain and cost reduction that you don't need to pay for your cards anymore, at least for a lot of the top decks. Third place was Shine Greymon. Interestingly enough, it is basically as vanilla as a Shine Greymon list can be. It is not really utilizing any of the new cards, so it's as good as it was since BT13, and it's still good now. And this variant, if anyone's unfamiliar between the differences, is the fact that this variant is more OTK focused because you're trying to use Shine to boost up the Punch Marcus, and you're giving it Security Attack Plus, then you Burst Mode, burn their Security, and then punch them again with a Rush Marcus, and you could swing for the game with the Digimon. So cool to see that, again, the deck is so strong that nothing really needed to change, and I don't know what the matchups were in order for them to get to that state, but good on them. Fourth place was Mirage. Mirage literally is just starting to use the fish tech because fishes are good. That's it. It's starting to lose its own cards in favor of the fishes. I find that to be funny, but yeah, that's Mirage. Then fifth place was Magnamon X, literally doing nothing new. Sixth place was Fen, doing nothing new. Seventh place was the pure purple hybrids deck, and this is the variant because there's 4 different ways to actually play purple hybrids. This is more of like the toolbox variant where it's just trying to use really good generic level 6 yellow Digimon to try to lock the opponent out of the game because you have Rahihimon and Jetselfimon as 2 insanely good level 5s, and then the rest of it is just utilizing Koji and AG to do like hybrid shenanigans with Mind Link and whatnot. Then the 8th place was Beelstar. So again, this is just using the Koji purple hybrid stuff that we've seen, except this time they're spicing it up with a little bit of Beelstar because the purple hybrid package is just that. It's a package. It's not like it you can make a full deck out of it, but you don't really need to just because the purple hybrids in of themselves just make up the bulk of it. So you can kind of do whatever you want. And they just elected to say, hey, I'm just going to throw Beelstar in and it's going to work out. And it did, because removal options are very rare to come by and can ruin a lot of the OTK decks. So it kind of just fit this like nice anti-meta spot. Then ninth place was Phoenixmon. Nothing new there. 10th place was Lord Nightmon. So all of the Lord Nightmons are the purple variant, and they're basically just playing like they are Anubismon for the most part. Let's just use the dog package to Digivolve and gain memory because, you know, that's not broken. Then you have X Antibody to be able to recycle pieces and Digivolve even cheaper and allow yourself to not need the base form in order to use any of the X Digimon's true abilities. Then they are spicing in a little bit of like other tech just to kind of round out the deck. So a Leviamon X, because, you know, if you could get into a Cerberus X off of a Proto form, you could just Digivolve for free into a Leviamon X, which is insanely broken. Tamer Hate also is super relevant. And then they're also splashing in Zed as just a game finisher because Overclock. You just sacrifice, ideally, the token that the Lady Devi X or the Deltamon is providing, and then you could just attack at the end of your turn for free. Doesn't matter how much memory you actually paid for the card because of how Overclock works. And it's just a really strong level 7 in general. But yeah, for the most part, that's just kind of how the deck functions. It's just dog up into Lord Nightmon, throw in an X Antibody somewhere, and then kind of just punch hard and control the field from there. So we got 3 of those. 11th place was Imperial. This is Dan Fang's list, and he, compared to the other Imperials, is using a more armor-focused variant. So it's just trying to actually say, you know what? I don't actually need the Imperial Jamon. Magnamon X is just such a stupidly dumb card and is insanely strong that most decks can't handle it. So why not just combine one of the best decks in the entire game with one of the best Digimon in the entire game? And it worked out for him a couple of times, actually. So he's made it in top slots a couple of times with that type of a variant. But as far as 12th and 13th, those were both Imperials. They're more the traditional Imperial, which technically has answers to everything in the entire game, as long as it's able to see its pieces. 14th place was another Fen deck, and then 15 and 16 were more Lord Nightmon decks, utilizing the Cerberus engine. So, yeah, it's good. Shocker. Who would have thought that being able to Digivolve for basically next to nothing all the way up into some of the most powerful level 6s in the game, which is exactly what Blue is doing, would be good. Which is kind of like where I wanted to like highlight the like color breakdown. If you didn't actually like stop and think and notice, the majority of these decks are literally 2 colors, and that's blue and purple, and they're literally doing almost the exact same thing, which is cheating on as much memory in the entire game as they can, while also having some of the highest levels of consistency, because half of blue's core identity is card draw, and half of purple's identity is just raw value in its resources between cycling through its deck, setting up its trash, and utilizing its trash as a secondary resource. So, like, literally the meta dynamic we find ourselves in right now is purple is checking blue and blue is checking purple, and that's kind of it, and that's where the majority of the top deck's color identities are. So, yeah, that's kind of just the meta report in a nutshell. I do think that we have like 1 or 2 more events of like this part A version of the format before we actually get into like the part B, when the side set comes out with the LM cards that we were missing, and that is actually gonna be Nationals format. So that's gonna impact the meta a little bit, but not a crazy amount. So sorry for the long-winded meta report. Just found it to be kind of important. So that way we kind of know where the direction of the game is headed, which is the same direction that it's always been heading since BT16. So, now with that out of the way, we actually could get into the Q&A portion. So, if you want to, I have a big list of questions. We might not get to them all, but we'll try our best to. So, if you want to start off with the first question, Jay Stewart, feel free.
Yeah, so one of the first questions I was asked was, what's one of the decks you wish was, or you wish as low tier, and one deck you wish was high tier? And what would you do to accomplish both? So I guess it's asking like, what do I prefer that was like bottom tier be a little more relevant? What was high tier be a little less relevant? Well, I'll break that down first. So to me, one of the decks I wish was a little bit lower tier, I would say would probably have to be Mirage, just because of the fact that we've been dealing with Mirage since BT13. It hasn't really slowed down or anything. It's just more of me, I guess, being tired of seeing it. So I would like it to kind of slowly die out, like a lot of other decks have, unfortunately, have been. And one of the decks that I wish was probably higher tier, if I had to guess, I mean, hmm, I want to say it probably would have to be the Rock Sky Metallica Dragon
Oh,
deck
Hina
from
Dragons, yeah.
Liberators. Yeah, just because there is like those level sixes seem really powerful and really good. Like I think the red one's able to stop from raising if it's a six K or lower or something like that, and they're able to play each other out if one's defeated. So it's like to me, it just on paper it kind of sounds good, but just some reason it's not. And I think the only thing that you could really do to accomplish that, I guess, I think Mirage is gonna have to get hit again. I mean, some people were already calling for that during the last ban list. So it's just like I think it needs a final nail on the coffin to just stop that, I guess. And as far as the Sky Dragons, I mean, I think they need another tamer. They need another Hina, if I remember correctly. That was something a lot of people were thinking we might have gotten, but just didn't for some reason.
So the reason why we didn't was because though that iteration of those cards was based off of the Liberator's novel, which Hina is not in. So
Hmm.
that's the primary reason why that we didn't get a new Hina, even though she's 100% deserved for how those cards work. Um, they tried to make them a little bit less reliant on Hina, but obviously having Hina just makes them that much better. Um, and to kind of like do my answer to the questions, so a deck that I wish was low tier but better probably would be uh, Leomon. Obviously, I think like green is in such an abysmal state that it just has a hard time winning the game. And Leomon actually seems like it does have some bite to it, or like enough potential bite to it to actually be able to close out games. Granted, you do have to rely on some other cards. So if I were to make that deck better, you would have to start with one, its protections, because Fortitude, unfortunately, right now is really bad because some of the best cards in like the game that are being played prevalently are not deletion based removal. So anything that's not deletion based removal, he kind of loses to. So he needs better protections on top of Fortitude. So you need to compound those protections similarly to how Dexter Goromon works, where it's like as long as you have the Dex in the trash, the main one, if you Digivolved up, is basically an immortal card, utilizing like the rookie with the Kosuke play. So I guess they would need something like that. I know adding more protections is not necessarily a good thing, but that's unfortunately what the deck needs, especially if you're not going to try to increase its tempo, because the other thing to do is make it easier and faster to build and rebuild. That would be the other thing, and you can kind of make that general statement for a lot of decks. So I'm just going to stick and focus mostly on the protection aspect because that's what the deck is trying to do. It's trying to protect its Digimon, and if it were to die, then it has Fortitude to fall back on to be able to replay it so it can keep itself going. So that's kind of like where I would take it. Maybe it does need like the Omnimon Ace style of treatment where you could delete it, but it could come back, and then it also could do some other stuff on top of that. So that's kind of where I would take that. And then as far as a strong deck to make it weaker, obviously the Cerberus engine is one of the dumbest things that Bandai has ever printed. And I honestly think like like something in there should be gutted, and it's very obviously the memory generation. So like Cerberus X probably needs to get hit in order for that deck to lose a lot of speed on top of Protoform. I think Protoform is just a absolutely degenerate card in general. So like I think with the exclusion, like if you take those two cards out of the deck, I think it becomes a little bit more fair, which might be the speed gap that it needs to be able to fight through in order to try to survive in the current environment. But I mean, if we're depowering decks, then it ideally should be enough to depower the deck to let other things actually have time to breathe. Um, so that's kind of where I'm at. Because, like, I do think we can have strong level sixes. It's just two easy and two efficient ways to get to those level sixes. Make those level sixes even stronger than they normally should be. So that's kind of my answer to that question. Next question, Jay Stewart.
Yeah, so your favorite anime archetype you wish could get more support, and what would be a new mechanic you would want for the game? So I guess one of my favorite animes in regards to Digimon is probably got to be the Tamers, honestly, because I love how the Tamers actually are a lot more important to the Digimon in that, because they can actually really help their Digimon partners, give them power ups and everything that they need, besides just standing there cheering for them and using the power of friendship, so to say, I guess. But also the fact that the Biomerge also represented that the Digimon partner and the Tamer ideals both became one, I guess, so to say. So, like, that's my favorite anime. As far as my favorite archetype, I mean, my profile picture should say it right here. My archetype has got to be the X antibody slash Alphamon line. I just I mostly have that love for that just because of the X antibody movie. Um, as far as more supports, I mean, I'm trying to think. I mean, I would kind of want to see, I guess, the fan beast get some more support, just because I like X anybody, I guess. And as far as new mechanics, I I don't know if it would be a new mechanic, so to say, but I would like to see Digiburst come back in some way, because it just seems like it's been forgotten. I feel like it could be really good if they could bring it back somehow. Maybe like find a way to like make the you're losing your sources be better. Like, you get more better bonus effects, but also a way to re-put your sources back in or something. I don't know, like a tamer, like when a source gets stripped, you could spend it to tuck uh certain sources, certain archetype back under, I guess.
Yeah, I get it. I think like Digiburst probably is, as much as we all kind of like harp on it. I think like Digiburst, especially for where the game currently is, depending on how they utilize it, can still be kind of like not super great. Um, but it all depends on the application, because I think like they did kind of peak it a little too quickly. And the constant usage of it between the first couple of early sets and its overall impact in the like early mid stages of the game definitely were very prevalent on how good and strong that mechanic could be for what it is. Especially now, where it's just like, okay, I can gain a whole bunch of resources, and then I could just throw those cards away because I already used their effects. I think that only exacerbates the problem a little bit more. But that's not the point. In terms of my actual answer to the question, my favorite, I'll just relate it to the Digimon show. My favorite season of Digimon probably has to be Data Squad, to be honest. I really liked just a lot of the cast. It seemed a little bit more mature also. Like it wasn't as like dark as what Tamers was, but it seemed like because the characters were just older in general, going from like preteens to teens, or like even younger, like elementary school to teens, really kind of just put more emphasis on the actual characters. And especially Marcus's role, punching Digimon was absolutely hilarious, and I loved every moment of it. And then Bancho Leomon obviously is the best dad ever. So that season holds a really special place in my heart. And as far as kind of like something that I wish would get more, and like an archetype that I wish would get more support, this is a really hard one because like there's a lot of archetypes, but a lot of them kind of feels kind of samey in a way. So like any traditional stack based archetype, I probably wouldn't want to support more of, and I think like Digicross because they did a whole bunch with that right from the get go. That probably doesn't need more support. If anything, I would want to kind of support not necessarily like the movie villains, but I do think like villain decks generally do need more support because they're most of the time just ones and dones. I'm not necessarily trying to say like, oh, seven great demon lords needs more support. No, that's not where I'm heading with this. I'm talking like more like the Eospawns, the Diaboromons, like some of the other like villain decks that only got like one, maybe two waves of support. Granted, their last couple of support when they did upgrade them were kind of like insane, but just some other minor villains like could use a little bit more support. And then as far as a mechanic that I would like to see added into the game, this is just my magic bias coming in, and I would love to see a sliver like type of mechanic where you could share the abilities with like Digimon. So, like, if I were to just take this base example, it's like Oops All Agumon on steroids, where it's the idea is okay, you have an Agumon with an ability that says all of your Agumons gain blah. Then you could have another Agumon that has that same style of ability, but they all gain blah. So that way, when you start having an army of Agumons, they'll all share each other's abilities and be like absolutely insane. I always love that. And I think Digimon can kind of do it relatively well, depending on how tastefully they want to go about it. Um, because those types of decks are usually snowball style decks where once it really starts going, it gets going. But with where the current state of the game is, it unfortunately doesn't really support that type of play. Unless like they make those cards absolutely cracked, which is again the problem that we're running into where it's like we can have lots of good ideas on paper, but where the meta is, it doesn't allow for that, unfortunately. And then what was the last part? Oh no, that was the last part. So yeah, that's kind of my answer to that question.
Yeah. So one of the next questions is, what is your favorite Digimon card artist and why? So for me, I wouldn't say I have a particular favorite artist because a lot of the times, a lot of the Digimon art is just really good if you really think about it. Because, like, I mean, I've seen the Pokemon TCG art. Nothing really stands out to me. I've played Yu-Gi-Oh before in Vanguard, and the art doesn't stand out. But a lot of these card arts, like, it's not even just the alt arts. Like, take the Goonimon from BT16, I think it is, or BT12, where he's just like kind of sitting there meditating and everything. That water style art, like that's like a common or uncommon card, and it's such a beautiful art and everything. But if I had to pick an artist, I would say I'm probably gonna butcher this name. Is Sasi, if I want to say that person's responsible for doing the art of the BT7 Dorumon alt art, the BT6 Alphamon alt art, and also the Ryudamon BT8 alt art. I mean, they these images alone to me, like I love the X body, and I just really love how they did the Dorumon and everything. It's kind of got like that magical circle, and you see his three different evolution lines behind him too at the same time.
Yeah. I'm kind of with you on the whole art aspect. Digimon has probably some of the best art in TCGs right now. Like, it's actually insane how many good pieces of art we have. And it's always nice to see, like, less appreciated Digimon get a new art that's actually official because there's a lot of Digimon that just don't get a lot of art. Like Hexablaumon's one of those where he literally just had his reference book image, and then outside of that, it was just fans doing it. So now that we have like a couple of different arts and alt arts, it really like helps flesh out that Digimon as an actual Digimon, and that's one of the biggest things that I appreciate with the Digimon card game is just even though they still could do a better job at picking specific Digimon, we do have a good representation overall in terms of some of the lesser Digimon, even if those cards aren't great. Their arts at least are. And then as far as my favorite artists, there's a lot that I really do like and respect. But I think like one of my favorite artists currently is Koki. Koki has like a very particular style to their cards that just it's always generally clean to look at. Like it's got like a softer, not necessarily like watercolory style, but like it's like a softer anime style. And I really dig it. I dig the vibes. But yeah, Digimon's got like a lot of absolutely insane art, um, and a lot of really good artists.
I just realized something too. The artists I mentioned, Sasi, they're actually also responsible for the normal art of the Lucemon X antibody slash Dio, as everyone calls him. I just realized that, and I kind of think it's a little bit funny.
Yeah, no, they do. There's a lot of like really good artists, and I always like the art competitions for that reason. Also, where it is kind of like a playbook from Pokemon, but that's not necessarily a bad thing when it's supposed to be celebrating. Like, hey, there is just a lot of really good artists in general, and this is a way for them to get some extra exposure, and get a card and potentially get a contract on being a recurring artist, which I think is like really cool because sometimes it can be really hard in the artist world.
Yeah, and also a lot of the time too, the Digimon art's actually able to tell a story behind the art too. Like, take that Lucemon X antibody for example. You see him catching. I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be Omnimon's sword and
It's
everything.
Jessmon.
Oh, is it Jesmon's sword?
It's Jessmon's.
Well, yeah, but it's like you could. There's a story behind a lot of the art that the Digimon has too.
Yeah,
And
story and references, like they do a really good job at cramming as much good stuff, like extra information and references and lore bits as they can into their arts, which I respect the ever living crap out of the artists that are able to do it so masterfully.
yeah. So one of the next questions is, how do you store your cards? So that kind of varies. So like typically with me, what I have, my little system I have is I have these binders that I put my SRs and secrets, and I typically like I've recently started switching out how I've been storing them because originally I was trying to store them by color, but now I'm going by set wise of release. So I have all my BT1s in a binder with the BT2s, so on and so forth. And then as far as like the commons, uncommons, and rares, I put them in like the what is it, those big white cardboard boxes and everything, and I put like little dividers in them and go, okay, well this is the green BT1, blue BT1, so on and so forth, going on.
You're more organized than I am. So, since I stopped buying cases, I literally just have like loose boxes that are organized by commons, rares, and uncommons. So that way, if I'm looking for a particular card, I know what box to kind of go into to start being able to look for those. When I was buying a case like cases, and I do have this exuberant amount of bulk, I was buying four rows. I probably should buy a couple of more four rows and just kind of like organize some of my current bulk in new four rows. But four rows are definitely the way to go when it comes to large quantity of cards. And when it comes to some of my more higher rarity cards, so I have my Master Playset Binders, which has a playset of every SR and above. for every single set as they come out. Then, when it comes to promos, I have a separate binder that attempted to try to get all the promos, and that became too stupid, so I kind of just stopped with that, and promos are kind of just wherever and whenever. And then I do have a couple of like trade binders, or like these are just my access super rare binders. And unfortunately, none of the stuff is really organized by like color or anything, so I do have to do a little bit of extra digging, but most of the time it's not necessarily that bad. At least I don't find it to be that bad. I know I could be more organized, but yeah, I'm not necessarily the most organized when it comes to like using a Dewey Decimal System to further enhance my card finding experience out of the cards that I have. Usually, I know the rough idea and estimate of what box they're in and where they're located. But my 4 rows are at least labeled, so there is that. But yeah, that's generally how I store my cards. My decks are usually stored kind of just wherever I use them. So I do have like a giant shoe tree that is just full of decks. I think it's like there's 20 or 30 decks in that shoe tree. Most of them are old at this point, and I don't really go back into them because it's not worth playing a lot of those decks because they're not meta relevant. And they never will be meta relevant. So I thought about breaking them down. I just haven't yet. And then I do have like fat packs that I store deck boxes in as well. So that's kind of like where I go for a lot of my decks when it comes to what I'm choosing. And then I do have like this Pokemon box that has Charizard on it, and that has some of my more competitive decks. But yeah, that's how I store my cards for the most part.
Yeah, and I know there's still some decks that I have that are still constructed. Like I have a Terramon deck that's constructed from the blue, or not the blue, the green yellow Halloween event that I've yet to break down. So I know I need to do that at some point as well. But one of the next questions is kind of relating back to something you mentioned earlier, was what kind of card do you think Leomon would need to be good? Now, I think what Bandai has recently done is they kind of figured out what they wanted to do with Leomon. Because I know he was like bouncing around with a lot of different colors. He was in blue, he was in yellow, green, and I think Bandai's just now finally figured out where they want him. But the problem is there's a lot of key components from other colors that Leo was in that really should, I think, be in able to work with those. Like the Jerry, for example, I think for me, he needs a dedicated tamer, so to say. Like he needs a green Jerry that could kind of do what the blue version did a little bit. Was on play, you could play a Leomon from your hand or something.
Yeah, I think a dedicated tamer is in the right direction, and kind of like what I was alluding to. He just needs extra protection on top of fortitude. Like yes, it's stacking protection on protection. But he needs, like, for where the current state of the game is, he needs basically a 2 cost delayed option that basically says he cannot, like, if he were to be bounced or returned to the hand bottom of the deck, like if he were literally to be removed from the field other than by deletion, then do something. And I think, like, honestly, that's all that the deck really needs in order to be more competitively viable, because he the other thing is just a little bit more extra DP probably wouldn't hurt, which is why like a lot of Leomon decks use Final Zubagon Punch, is to be able to get over 16k pretty easily with heavy Leomon, and then Security Attack plus multi-swinging can be really good. He's got good removal. Like he's got lots of really good tools. Like maybe like part of that delay option or part of the tamer is like triggering their on delete effects similarly to Phoenixmon, so that way I actually can have more access at his inheritables, because most of his inheritables are just generic on delete, do something, and then he has no real reward outside of fortitude to be able to trigger them himself. So like maybe a tamer that can trigger the inheritable on deletes to do something, and then an option that can help keep him around better. And then I think like he's actually in a good spot. Once we get those two styled cards for Leomon more specifically.
Yeah, no, I think those are perfectly fair. So, because like, if I was to think about it, like if they had a tamer that was like a memory setter and then had an effect of when one of your Leomons in name is attacking, you could suspend the tamer to activate one of the on deletion effects. That way it's not too broken or anything. And then if you just make the option card like a simple, like a basic search or something, like reveal top three, grab a Leomon, and then bottom deck the rest, and then the lake effect could be if this Digimon would be bottom decked or bounce back to hand, something like you were saying, you could delete the option card instead. That way it's not too broken of a protection, so to say.
Yeah, I mean, but it's still there and it's still relevant. So, like, I don't. Again, we're just spitballing ideas and figuring out conceptually what the deck would need in order to be more competitively viable. Because I do like Leomon. I do think he is a strong deck and has lots of good things going for him. It's just, again, where the current environment is kind of just sucks for him because the second you see a blue deck, you're already in for a really bad time. Like it almost
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter what blue deck it is. It's just you see blue, it's almost an auto loss.
Yeah. So kind of what you were just saying there about blue, as Team Blue auto loss. The next question is top three decks you like and top three decks you don't like. So for me, the top three decks I like. I like the Alphamon deck. I will be a little more specific. BT13, I think, is probably a really good one. Uh, just kind of playing a little favoritism here. The next deck I like, back in BT5 when Chaos Gallimon was introduced, I know it wasn't the best deck, but it was like one of the first decks I played when I was in Digimon. I don't know how. I just keep beating this person that was playing a Lord Nightmon from that, and I was able to beat them with Chaosmon. And Chaosmon has like a special place in my heart because of that. And as far as like my third favorite deck, um, shoot, I I don't know. I wasn't really expecting third. Third. I'll have to come back to that third one because I can't think right now. But the other part, as the three decks I don't like, Mirage as of right now, just because of how relevant it's been sticking around and everything. Another deck I haven't liked was back in BT7 was well BT7 slash EX1 was Blue Hybrids. It was a really good deck that was able to just stun your deck, and there was no way you could really out it at the time of it. And my third least favorite deck probably was Security Control. If I had to spitball guess one, just due to the fact that when I was first starting to get into the game, I had a hard time going against it. And even in BT9, like my Alphamon deck could answer it, but I always had to be in the mindset of, oh, if I do X, can they respond, so to say? Like, I had to be extremely careful. I had to very specifically set certain pieces. Like, I had to think 20 turns ahead, so to say, against it. So, it's not that I hate Secon with a burning passion or anything. It's just, it was something I just really wasn't fond of playing against, I guess. But back to being the third deck I liked playing. I guess I kind of liked playing War Greymon. Well, specifically Black War Greymon back in BT8 because I kind of was doing like this whole niche of using the Geo Gray security and everything, and I liked what that version of Black War was doing at the time back in BT8. It was one of the only few ways you could actually remove tamers too. On top of that,
Yeah. So, my answers are probably going to be a little bit more quicker and simplistic. Three decks that I really liked. The first deck I truly enjoyed was God, it was Garurumon. BT9 Gurumon X. I really enjoyed that deck, like, a lot. Multi-attacking is kind of my, like, hyper aggressive decks are usually my jam. So that was like one of the first true hyper aggressive decks that actually started to, like, you know, be a real deck rather than just a jumbled pile of cards, because we weren't exactly an archetype focus game until around BT8, BT9. Then one of the other decks I really enjoyed playing, um, I guess, like, I'm not gonna say I really liked Leomon, because Leomon, I just like the Digimon, therefore I'm forcing myself to play the deck. But a deck that I really found myself enjoying a lot probably would be Cross Hearts. Like, I really do like, again, aggressive, fast paced style decks, but like Cross Hearts had a good level of customization to it, to where it really rewarded deck builders. And then it also rewarded pilots for being able to figure out the ways to be able to use the pieces that you're teching in efficiently. And I also liked the nature of the fact that it's a non-traditional style deck, so it's not stack, like, building. So it was just a little bit easier for it to kind of flow and function. And I really appreciated that, which is why the third deck that I kind of liked was Red Hybrids, back in BT, like, 12. And even though, yes, there was Greymon and Blackboard Greymon running around, I still really just liked Red Hybrids, because the warp into Emperor is just some of the most fun I've ever had. Just being like, ha, surprise, here's a level 6 in response. Like, it had such good aggression, and it also had such good responses. That's like part of the appeal of it, is like the aggression only feeds the responses, so it just had a really good feedback loop to it. And then as far as decks I hate, obviously, I hate Security Control with a burning passion of 1,000 suns, which is why I kind of, by proxy, hate Mother Control with a burning passion of 1,000 suns. They are just decks that are designed to be as degenerate and unfun as possible. And obviously, I like having fun, and that's why I hate those decks. I also think that their existence just proves that there's certain issues and aspects with security system and other mechanics in combination with each other that are actually just problematic. But, you know, Bandai doesn't actually like to acknowledge a lot of the problems that they do. So, unfortunately, that deck is a deck. Then the next deck I kind of hate facing is, it's gonna be like another cop outy answer. I kind of just hate OTK decks. Like, yes, I'm an aggressive player. Yes, I have played OTK decks, but I don't find them fun, especially in their current iteration. So, like, Fen and Mirage are incredibly boring matchups, because first couple of turns they're just gonna sit there, do nothing, and just build up back row cards that I can't interact with. And then the second they move out is the second they try to win the game. And that's just, it's lame. It's so lame, it's so stupid, and it's so boring. And it literally doesn't reward anyone for anything and show any kind of skill at all. Um, Not saying like I played it because it's a skillless deck. I was playing it mostly out of the principle of, I'm so sick of this game right now in its current state that it no interaction is better than the few bits of toxic interaction that we currently get. So yeah, that's my stance on those types of decks. And then the last deck that I don't really enjoy playing against is probably Imperial, because the current state of Imperial is, like, insane, because he, like, if you actually stop and read all of his cards and all of his abilities, he actually has the answer to everything in the entire game except for delayed based options. Like, he can turn off OTK decks. He can turn off Ace Digimon. He just can do so much to shut the opponent out while building up on its own game plan and aggressing at the same time in such a manner that it's just very hard to respond to. And if you don't respond to it in very particular ways, you just automatically lose the game. And by proxy, Magnamon X kind of functions in a similar way, where it's just like, I honestly just don't care about anything that you're doing. I'm just going to do my own thing, aggress really hard, really quickly, and I have such good tools that it handles basically the majority of the game. And I think that's kind of boring and not very enjoyable gameplay either. So I know that was technically more than 3 decks, that was more like 6 decks, but they all kind of fit into similar categories.
Yeah, and to be fair, like I can't easily say that, the newest version of Imperial, because there's been times where I have sat across from opponents, like they go first and they just open up by hatching, rookie, and then it's the dual tamer. And I just look at them and go, you got it, don't you? And they just kind of look at me and go, yeah, I got it. And it's like I kind of lose because I can't do anything in response on my first turn like they are able to do, set up such a powerful board like that.
Yeah. And a lot of decks, unfortunately, like a lot of the best decks are literally like that, which is, again, why I don't necessarily think this meta is very good or enjoyable, and why my frustrations have just been going ever so increasingly and quickly. And it's not like these decks are that fun to play either, because, like, I know a lot of people are complaining about turns right now taking, like, forever, and that's because they're doing so much and paying so little that they're allowed to take longer turns, because it's just like, oh, yeah, this whole transaction going from a level 3 to a level 6 with all these multiple triggers happening, playing Digimon out for free and whatnot, that all costed like 1 memory. And then I'm sitting here and it's been like 5-10 minutes into a single turn. And it's not good gameplay. That's not what I define as good gameplay.
Yeah. So one of the next questions is, when do you think Galacticmon will rise again?
Never.
Um,
I'll stop right there. Just never. The big problem with the card is blue is a color and blue exists and blue source strips, and it ruins literally the entire game plan of the deck. Like, yes, okay, there is the caveat and cop out of like, okay, if you take away blue source stripping, is the deck actually that good? Still no, because it's on the slow side. So, he needs a good amount of speed shifting in order to actually be like really good, and protection. He needs like protection from source stripping and some other effects on top of his already built-in protection, and then maybe he could start being good. Start, maybe.
yeah, because like I would say it's whenever the tamer for the Galacticmon shows up again in Liberator, but we've kind of been seeing with the Liberator cards. Yes, there's one or two that are really good, like Hexablow, but a lot of the times the decks are not as powerful as what the current meta is reflecting. So I can't even say like, Liberators is gonna make it broken, so to say. I mean, it's kind of like what I mentioned with the Digiburst idea earlier. If the Tamer could somehow have like an all turns effect, maybe if like when the card is stripped from source, you could tap it to put a source back in or something. Maybe that might make it like its sources a little more relevant, I guess, maybe. I don't know. It's however Bandai is thinking they may do it. If they even are going to make that Tamer play Galacticmon still, because we don't know. Because take what is it, that red Dragnot guy, whatever? Like, we
Owen?
saw in the,
Yeah, Owen.
yeah, Owen, like, he was playing a War Greymon deck at the very first iteration of the Liberators card game, but now he's not, it looks like he doesn't have War Greymon anymore. He has this red lizard dinosaur thing from Jurassic Park that spits acid at you.
I mean, I kind of like his new Digimon. He's pretty dope.
Yeah.
But Zenith is 100% Galacti. He's still on the Galacti train, and maybe it just needs a new level 6. I don't know. But as of right now, until it gets actually new wave of like insanely good support, it's not going to be relevant, unfortunately.
Yeah. Next question. Favorite Digimon lore? I mean, I've mentioned it multiple times. X Anybody. I love the story arc behind it, whether it's the X Anybody movie. I mean, just the idea that, the Digiworld was in chaos and then you have all these Digimon, like original Digimons getting like these new forms, these more edgier, more extreme, bad A looking designs and everything too. And even the idea that these pure X antibody Digimon were created, like Lugumon, Dorumon, Ryudomon, Bambi's technically one of those. I think Dracomon is also an original X antibody Digimon. I can't remember for sure, but
Dracmon, yeah, he's
Dracomon,
a
yeah,
he's a native carrier. Yeah, you have your three prototypes, and you have your basically just natural carriers. They were born into the digital world as already having the X antibody inside of them.
yeah. I just love the X antibody lore and everything.
And to be fair, like that actually is my answer as well. Like the how deep the X antibody rabbit hole goes just on that one topic alone is probably some of the best and biggest amounts of Digimon lore there is. Like, sure, you could go into the lore about the Olympus 12 and the Royal Knights and some other stuff, but like just the idea on this, not only just the story but everything behind X antibody is like actually really cool and insane. Gameplay wise, completely overpowered and busted, but lore wise is some of the best lore in Digimon, like that Digimon has to offer.
Yeah. So next question is, what are some practices or products from other TCGs that could benefit the game? So this is something I was hoping RB01 would have done, but I think the biggest problem with it. So let me go ahead and just say, so I played Yu-Gi-Oh before, Digimon, and one of the biggest things that came out every year was the quote unquote Megaton, where Konami took a bunch of the relevant meta cards, put them all in a single set, bumped down some high rarity cards, and then gave some low rarity cards some rarity bump ups and everything, so to say. Like, so it was just like made it kind of an interesting way to pull, but they also did like cards you really wanted, they still kept at the very high rarity. But I was hoping RB01 was going to be like that. But the big problem to me was one, it came out later than, so like, I think over in JP they got it before BT13, if
Yeah,
I
and even
remember correctly.
yeah, and even then it was still too late because a lot of the cards were like literally block zero cards. Like almost everything was block zero cards. And then they
Yeah,
had a
1 through 5.
sprinkling of new cards which were barely meta relevant at that time.
Yeah, so like the fact that we got RB01 in a later format than what JP got, but a lot of those cards really weren't even relevant anymore. Like the Agumon from that one, what was it? You revealed top 5 cards and you add a tamer, no inheritables or anything. Like it's like not a lot of those cards aren't good anymore. Like part of me hopes they could maybe do another version of RB01, like slash Megaton idea, where they do take a lot more, and I mean a lot more of the recent cards that are meta, or even just giving us like a Megaton of all the promo cards that were so hard for us to get, or even the SRs. Like take Protoform, take Cherubimon, Diaboromon from EX6. You know, you put those in a set. You take the promo cards from EX06 in there too. Like just because normally Bandai's not. We're never going to see another printing of EX06. So, and it's why we see the prices as high as they are. So, just part of me is like hoping that maybe Konami could tackle or combat the, stores not ordering enough product of that and just redistribute out in another set, like reprint the cards that people want.
Yeah, I mean, reprint equity is usually like how other games do and utilize their reprint equity is what makes them more accessible and in turn slightly more appealing. So while you kind of want the Megaton slash master set kind of idea, I actually want the challenger or like elite tamer deck kind of idea where they actually just give us a meta deck. It's like, hey, we understand that I'm just gonna pick on Fenrir Lugumon right now. We understand that Fenrir Lugumon is a really good deck, so we're just gonna sell you the deck, which in turn a reprints the cards and b lets players actually have an even easier access at it. Like, yes, we do have the advanced decks, but the advanced decks, while they are designed to be competitive out of the box, it's a brand new deck. It's a brand new product full with new cards, mostly, with a little sprinkle of reprints just as an extra little bonus. And I think, like, just literally having a reprint deck and just giving us the deck as is, that can actually go a long way towards making the game not only more accessible but cheaper as well, because they could say, hey, kind of like what you were saying with EX6, it's just like, cool, we won't sell you a 7th grade Demon Lord deck, but we can at least sell you like a Lucimon-esque deck, or we could sell you a 3 Great Angels-esque deck, and then maybe they could sprinkle like 1 or 2 new cards in to really kind of like tie the strategy up, like tie it a little bit tighter to make it even better than it was before. Or just, they don't even have to do that. They could literally just do 100% reprint everything that we've already done. Here it is. You don't have to go through multiple different sets to buy all of these different cards or go through all these different singles. Here is just the deck. I think that is something that Digimon can benefit from. Especially since Digimon has, compared to a lot of other Bandai games, a huge starter deck issue where some of their other games get more starter decks than we do. And I think that's pretty sad and pathetic. So, like, that's kind of where I think, like, a challenger deck style idea would benefit the game immensely.
No, and I do think that is fair, because I know it's Yu-Gi-Oh! At times, like, take a Rainbow Dragon, for example. They printed off some new cards for it, and they'll, like, make a starter deck for it, and they'll bring back some older cards that might be a little hard to get at that current moment in time in it.
Yeah, like, having different ways to use your reprint equity in a smart way can go very far, especially for consumer confidence.
Yeah. And I think that's going to tie up to the next question is, what do you think was the biggest mistake in the Digimon TCG? And to me, I would say it is the reprint equity. Because there's like so many opportunities for Bandai to reprint a lot of good and popular cards. We've seen them starting to do that now with, like, say, the Raremon, the X Antibody Protoform, the Death X in the Event Pack 6 and everything.
Yeah,
But
but I
like,
wouldn't lock
it,
it to just Event Pack
oh,
6.
right, right. But
Or
like,
it's
if
technically
you were to,
7, but yeah.
but like, if you take like store tournaments, packs, and everything, like earlier in this year, like there was like a lot of store tournament kits that are just like god awful that just really didn't have a, like, that could have been so much better to reprint other cards. Because I know what Yu-Gi-Oh! Again likes to do, and not trying to always reference Yu-Gi-Oh! But this is the biggest experience of TCG I have, is that what Yu-Gi-Oh! Sometimes does is, in their store tournament packs, they will put, they'll put some filler cards in and everything, but they'll also include cards that are like meta relevant in there that have seen play and everything.
Yeah, with the store event packs, Bandai tried to kind of do it, except one, the cards came out too late, so their meta relevancy was usually gone. And two, most of the time they limited themselves to low rarity cards. So, like, very rarely would you ever see an SR and above actually get a meaningful reprint that would make something more accessible.
Yeah, because like I think right around the time when they introduced having the Survive promo cards in the store tournament kit, and they included all the other ones that we've never had access to before. It's like I think that's when they started to realize, oh, we could really make these tournament kits a lot better, so to say. Instead of locking these Survive promos in box toppers, we could do store tournament kits, and I think that's a lot better because there's a lot more of those out now. They're a lot easier to access. You don't have to buy a whole booster box to get them, so to say.
Yeah. In my perspective, Digimon's biggest mistake, I've already been on record saying this before and I'll say it again. The entirety of Block 3 was a ginormous mistake for the entire game. I think that block and leading up to that block was so damaging because technically RB1 was leading up into that block. And that was an absolute disaster that damaged the game. And then the sets preceding it did nothing but power spike the game to such an unhealthy level that right now, Block 4 is barely even meta relevant because everything from Block 3 is what we're playing. It's just the more powerful cards. So I honestly think like just Block 3 as a whole was Digimon's biggest mistake. That does include the training cards because those were designed in Block 3 as well at the start of it with BT14. BT14 wasn't that bad, but like literally everything preceding BT14 was like god awful. And I'm not going to sit here and say BT14 was great. I think like designing Lucamon to be like this dumb OTK deck was kind of stupid too, but it wasn't that out of the realm considering what we literally were coming off of. Which is why I thought like power wise it was on par with everything from BT13. That's what made me appreciate it. But now it's just like, oh, with how mind link works with hybrids, that's kind of unhealthy and slightly problematic. And like you just get a lot of like really you just look at Block 3 and everything that came in it and you'd be like, okay, yeah, a lot of this was actually kind of egregiously stupid and I don't know why they did it. So like that to me is the biggest mistake that Bandai has made is the entirety of Block 3.
Yeah, because I think besides that, there is also a lot of cards that just seem like they had no real filter or like they're really powerful, but they're not locked into particular archetypes. Like take the whole Apocrymon, for example. Yes, playing it is archetype locked, but at the end of the turn, tucking a level 6 is not archetype locked at all. And I think that's one of Bandai's biggest mistakes right there is one of, for example, so to say.
Yeah, and they really like it really doesn't give me a lot of confidence that they actually learned their lesson. Like, yes, I'm sitting here and I'm saying that Block 4 is depowered, but they're still kind of making similar mistakes just on a lower power level, which I think is like it's okay only in the perspective that Block 3 was just so much more powerful than everything else that came before it that it was kind of just that dumb. Um and like, yeah, sure, you could say that Mirage is a Block 2 deck, but realistically, he's stopped playing a lot of his Block 2 cards and he's starting to play a lot of Block 3 cards that are making some of the Block 2 cards even more powerful and toxic, just like the fishes. So, like, he's slowly transitioning off of his own cards into generic Block 3 cards. So, again, you kind of start seeing the parallel where it's just like, even the good decks got better because of like how good Block 3 was in terms of power creep. And not like in a good sense, like good as in like this is too powerful in a sense.
Yeah. And then one of the next questions is what can and should Digimon do to help player retention while being a new player friendly to keep players coming in?
Yeah,
So I think
there's a little subcontext there that the user also put where it's like unfortunately for them they're slowly finding the game to be less enjoyable as it once was. Again, that's just the sentiment of like this ever growing frustration as the meta basically is stagnant. And they also think that a lot of it is due to poor management of the TCG in general. So I just wanted to add that extra little bit of context to the question.
yeah, because I mean, as you were kind of like we were just talking about too, is like to help player retention. Because like I feel like what some people leave the game for is just because of like when Digimon first started out, there was like some checks and balances to certain things. Like I'll take I don't know if I could take anything in particular too good, but like the whole concept of like green, for example, you evo cheap and go into your line really fast, but it's not like the Digimon are crazy broken powerful. Or you could take a little bit slower of building up a stack, so to say, and get powerful effects. Kind of idea philosophy, I guess. But we're kind of now running into the problem of the whole green concept of uh, Evo cheap really fast and getting to something that's really powerful really fast. And even also the whole aspect of nothing's really locked into certain things that really should be when you consider the stuff as well. Like we mentioned with like a Pokemon, the whole Cerberus package being like this broken, stupid good thing that a lot of decks are using, kind of replacing the whole Where Garurumon EX5, that was doing even too.
Yeah, I mean, they just created too many good generic cards that are being too efficient for the game that's pushing a lot of stuff out. Like, the majority of purple has basically been almost, well, actually, almost the entirety of purple at this point has been cannibalized by the Cerberus engine and what can be played with the Cerberus engine, just because of just, gaining memory is more efficient than actually having an extra ability to do something else, because the combination of the when digivolve to trigger the gain memory is what's allowing like both blue and purple to excel faster than other colors, and that's why everything else is kind of getting pushed out of the format if they're not having the equal amount of tools to be able to combat that speed in a non-traditional sense, or just ignore it because they have so much protection they just actually don't care. So those are like the three aspects. But in terms of like helping player retention, that's they just have to make the game more exciting. Like, to be honest, more constant ban lists to kind of shake things up a little bit, I think, is a really good thing, especially if the game is only going to get higher power from here. Because I already think that like we're at a very unhealthy pinnacle. Like, we're at the top of this unhealthy mountain, and we need to start climbing down it. Um, and I think like having those constant shakeups make the game more interesting, because right now I'm absolutely bored shitless because it's this meta is the same meta that I've basically been playing in forever, just with a couple of new purple decks added into the mix, because purple is the only other color that's competitive outside of blue. And I think like that's kind of a problem in of itself. And I think like new player support products, kind of what I was alluding to in the other comment. I think like we don't have enough new player support products, and what we do have is pretty bad. Like, the Liberator decks was a good step in the right direction, but honestly, this would have been the opportunity to print 6 Liberator decks, one for each color. I don't know why they didn't do that. I think that was really dumb. They have enough characters to do it. I do know why. It's because a lot of the characters in their decks didn't exactly get revealed yet. But who cares? Just even if they delayed the starter decks and done like a wave of 3, like 3 here, 3 there, I think that would have been like immensely better than what we got now. Even if the decks aren't like super highly competitive, they still are good, like well constructed, well designed starter decks. So like that would also help with new player attraction, and just the new players coming in means that they have different personalities and different interests, which then would increase retention, because now you're not seeing the same stuff over and over again just because the player pool is now expanded.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is there's not really a lot of back and forth, so to say, because it feels like once the starting deck just gets to a certain point, there's nothing you could really do to catch up anymore. Like, it's just kind of out of your hands at that point.
Yeah, or the game is literally just over.
Yeah. So I think one of the next questions is this to me is a good one. How would you like to know how, or I would like to know how you would fix options, since the state they are currently in is abysmal. Is either a staple promo like the training or the men boost, or an archetype specific one. Insert a long name here, or soon to be scrambles or hard removal for cheap. How would you fix the option cards? I mean, because to me, it's like early on in the Digimon, it seems like the really good option cards they were removals, but they had a high cost and everything that you typically play at the end of your turn. Um, and after, but like, and later on, like, it's starting in BT 14, once we had aces starting to get introduced, the idea of these powerful high cost removal option cards seemed really good because of the whole aces. So it was the introduction idea of maybe options should be a little more relevant, but now it's just like we're starting to get into this thing where it doesn't matter anymore, because if you take Magnamon X, for example, I'm not trying to constantly keep going back to this one, but you can even look at Tyrant Kabuterimon. they check a security card and a security option bomb, and it's just not able to do anything against them because they have those quote unquote protections, so to say.
Well, Magnamon, if it's the very first check, the security will trigger before Magnamon gets his ability to protect himself. So like that's one of the few instances where it's just like, okay, a security option is relevant, and then Tyrant actually can't protect himself against security options at all. Um, so there's that, and I think like the big problem is the fact that based on deck design and how tight deck space is and what we're trying to play and prioritize, most of the time it's better to focus on winning the game rather than not losing the game. And most option cards are, or like most removal options are, let me try to not lose the game, which is now seen as bad, especially since they do have the higher cost, and you can't always rely on the opponent having an ace to out them, like to get them out. So I think like that's a big problem, is just literally the introduction of too many staples just removes and reduces the amount of options and option variety that we have in the game. So honestly, this is why I want the scramble, or not scramble, the not memory boosts either, the training cards. This is why I'm so vehemently avid on getting them out, because that now frees up space to run like 2 tech options, 2 removal options, or 4 removal options, or like it opens up deck space. That's honestly the only realistic way that I see options being more relevant on a mass scale, other than a deck more specifically like Beelstar, where it's designed around options, or Sakuyamon, or the soon-to-be new Justymon. Because right now, there's no reason never to not run the accelerants, and that's the big problem.
Yeah, because like even with the Justimon, like to me, it's like I was thinking about it, I was like, why do I even care if I actually want to build this whole device option card thing? I could just run him and delete my opponent's delay option cards that they were trying to set up. That sounds like so much better than doing what the deck wants to do, even.
Yeah. But that's honestly the only real way that I can see them fixing options. And then this will bring us to the last question. Um, when did the complexity of rules really take off in Digimon? Or when do you think the rules and knowledge of card interactions mattered more for competitive play? Um, as a person who's played the game competitively since its inception, honestly, I think around BT13 is when interactions got kind of high, because that's when we started getting more chaining of events, where it's just like, okay, you have Marcus on how it works. So like now you have new style of triggers happening when a Digimon comes out of the raising, because they have the start of main. They could do something, and then your tamers will do something else. And then Marcus, more specifically, when you swing with the Marcus after turning him into a Digimon, now can uh, not only attack, but can digivolve one of your Digimon. So now you have 2 different actions starting to happen at the same time, on top of the fact that the Digivolution will also trigger when digivolving. So you can start to see like around the BT, like around the BT12 time, I'd probably say like BT, actually if I had to pinpoint it, it's probably more like block 2 is when it started to get a little bit on the complex side. I'd say probably like to pinpoint an actual set, BT11 was the real big proprietor of that, because of just how the new All Force kind of worked, and how all of the abilities of everything just needed to play out. Like, I honestly think that's when the complexity started to get higher. And then obviously Block 3 kind of just completely and utterly shattered it. With like you needing to know very precise interactions and specific outs to things, and like that's kind of like Block 3 really did a lot of damage on reshaping how we approach and how we think Digimon is and how we play it.
Yeah, if I had to try to pinpoint, I would say it's right around the EX3 Draconic Roar set, mostly because of the whole Xmon interaction. And I swear, there's even to this day, there is still people that will call Judge because of ruling questions over that deck if it ever gets seen played again. And heck, I'm even guilty of asking all these random questions. I would go, well, if this particular circumstances, if I have X, Y, and Z set up underneath Xamon, if I had the Terriamon where this Digimon is suspended, I get the DP plus, and like how does this whole evade work and the timing, and then it was just like I would say Xamon is like one of the first earliest questionable rulings. I guess we players really started taking notice, and I would even say Leviamon's whole interaction, because it's like when exactly does his option card trigger? Is it after I resolve playing? Is it when my Digimon, like, can my Digimon activate its on play before he gets to trigger his
Yeah, multiple
option
instances.
card?
Yeah, multiple instances of protection. Does it bypass it because it's deleting the same Digimon twice if it's the only thing on the field? That's more of like EX uh
Five.
5, or yeah, that's EX 5. Examon was like what, EX 3, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um I that like I said is around block 2, like the start of block 2 is when things kind of started to get more complex, but that just comes natural because off of block 1 was kind of vanilla-esque in terms of the rules interactions. There wasn't a whole lot of crazy stuff, so obviously as time progresses things get more and more complex. Block 3 with aces really kind of cemented the level of complexity that the game can hit, especially with multiple different interactions triggering, being a more constant thing on how we're going to be resolving these style of effects. So yeah, I would probably agree, like around block 2 is when things started getting more complex. But block 3 to me really solidified the complexity. So I think that's all the questions that we have. If you want, feel free to type in the comments down below any questions that you would have, and I can try to start compiling them for a potential future episode with another Q&A section. So all of these questions that we have read off were actually from either my Discord or a YouTube post or video. So I do read them and I do take those questions, and well, now here's some answers to some of those questions. I know this was a little bit on the longer side just because there was a good amount of questions that we wanted to go through on top of good discussions. So I want to take this time to thank everyone for watching, especially making it all the way to the end. And with that, I hope to see you all in the next episode.